Imagine yourself a delicate porcelain doll, exquisitely crafted, adorned with the finest silks and jewels, placed atop a pedestal for all the world to admire. Now, imagine that pedestal begins to crack, the silks fray, and the admiring gaze turns to one of suspicion, then hatred. This was, in essence, the life of Marie Antoinette, a woman whose journey from an Austrian archduchess to the Queen of France, and ultimately to the guillotine, is a stark portrayal of privilege, power, and the terrifying caprice of public sentiment. Her story, often sensationalized and oversimplified, reveals a complex individual thrust into an impossible role who, despite her initial naivete and later struggles, can be viewed as an undeniably oppressed figure, a victim of circumstance and the tumultuous tides of history. Born Maria Antonia Josepha Johanna on November 2, 1755, at the Hofburg Palace in Vienna, Marie Antoinette was the 15th and youngest daughter of Empress Maria Theresa and Holy Roman Emperor Francis I. Her childhood was, by all accounts, one of extraordinary privilege, though not necessarily one of idyllic freedom. As a child of the Habsburg monarchy, she was surrounded by opulence, yet her life was meticulously structured, preparing her for a destiny intertwined with European power politics. Education, while provided by tutors, was not her strong suit. She preferred music, dancing, and theatricals to academic rigor, a predilection that would later be used against her by her critics. French, the language of the French court, was a particular struggle, a hurdle that would prove ironically significant. Her mother, Empress Maria Theresa, a formidable and pragmatic ruler, viewed her children as pawns in the intricate game of international diplomacy. The strategic alliance between the Bourbon and Habsburg dynasties, long-standing rivals, was a cornerstone of her foreign policy. The marriage of a Habsburg archduchess to the Dauphin of France, the future Louis XVI, was the ultimate prize, a means to solidify this alliance and maintain the balance of power in Europe. Thus, at the tender age of 14, Maria Antonia's fate was sealed. She was to become the future Queen of France. The transition was abrupt and overwhelming. In April 1770, she embarked on a ceremonial journey from Vienna to Versailles. The symbolic handover at a pavilion on an island in the Rhine near Strasbourg was a stark reminder of her status as a diplomatic commodity. She was stripped of all her Austrian clothes and belongings, literally shedding her old identity to embrace her new one. This act, meant to signify her complete integration into French culture, was a profound and early experience of the loss of self, a precursor to the many ways her identity would be molded and ultimately destroyed by forces beyond her control. Upon crossing the border, she was formally introduced to her new household and the Dauphin, Louis Auguste, a shy, awkward, and equally young boy of 15. The marriage ceremony, a lavish affair, took place at the Palace of Versailles on May 16, 1770. Her initial years at Versailles were marked by a profound loneliness and isolation. The French court was a labyrinth of strict etiquette, ancient customs, and subtle power struggles. Marie Antoinette, with her Austrian upbringing and informal demeanor, struggled to navigate this complex social landscape. Her natural vivacity and love of entertainment clashed with the rigid formality of Versailles. The Dauphin, her husband, was equally ill-suited for the role. He was introverted, deeply religious, and lacked the charisma and decisiveness expected of a future king. Their marriage remained unconsummated for many years, a source of immense public speculation and private anguish for Marie Antoinette, further solidifying her feeling of being a foreigner and an outsider. This failure to produce an heir immediately fueled gossip and resentment, a constant undercurrent of pressure that amplified her already precarious position. She sought solace in a small circle of friends, many of whom were chosen for their agreeable personalities rather than their aristocratic standing, further alienating her from the established court factions. Her extravagant fashion choices, her love of gambling, and her pursuit of pleasures like building her own private hamlet, the Hameau de la Reine at Versailles, were misinterpreted and magnified by a populace already burdened by poverty and economic hardship. These innocent diversions, intended to provide her with a semblance of normalcy and escape from the stifling court, became potent symbols of her perceived detachment and indifference to the suffering of her people. She was a young woman, barely out of childhood, Thrust into a world where every move was scrutinized, every action politicized, her attempts to find personal happiness were invariably twisted into accusations of extravagance and moral decay. The honeymoon period for Marie Antoinette and the French monarchy was tragically short-lived. Louis XV died in 1774, and Marie Antoinette, at just 18 years old, became Queen of France. The initial hopes for a new, vibrant reign quickly dissipated. The French economy, already teetering on the brink of collapse due to years of costly wars and inefficient financial management, worsened considerably. The American Revolutionary War, in which France heavily invested to spite its old rival Britain, exacerbated the financial crisis. While Louis XVI was genuinely concerned with his people's welfare and made efforts towards reform, he was ultimately indecisive and lacked the political acumen to navigate the turbulent waters of the late 18th century. Marie Antoinette, despite her evolving understanding of her royal duties, became an easy target for public discontent. Her image, initially one of a beautiful and charming queen, began to soar. The unconsummated marriage, eventually resolved after 7 years, had already created a fertile ground for malicious rumors. The infamous affair of the diamond necklace in 1785, a complex fraud in which she was an innocent party, irrevocably damaged her reputation. Although she was proven innocent, the public believed she was deeply implicated, viewing it as further evidence of her boundless extravagance and moral depravity. This incident was a turning point, solidifying her image as a corrupt and manipulative foreign queen. The burgeoning popular press, often fueled by anti-monarchical sentiments, relentlessly attacked her. Pamphlets and caricatures depicted her as Madame Deficit, the Austrian, and a morally bankrupt spendthrift who lived in lavish excess while her people starved. The iconic, though apocryphal, quote, "Let them eat cake," became a powerful symbol of her perceived callousness and disconnect from the reality of the French people's suffering. While there is no historical evidence she ever uttered these words, the phrase perfectly captured the public's bitter perception of her. The Enlightenment, with its emphasis on reason, liberty, and equality, was challenging the very foundations of absolute monarchy. The ideas of Rousseau, Voltaire, and Montesquieu were widely discussed, particularly in the salons and coffee houses of Paris. The American Revolution, with its successful overthrow of monarchical rule, provided a potent example of a people's ability to assert their rights. Marie Antoinette and Louis XVI, as symbols of the old regime, became the embodiment of everything the revolutionaries sought to dismantle. She was not just a queen. She was a representation of the perceived injustices of the monarchy, a scapegoat for centuries of accumulated grievances. The public's initial fascination with her turned into a deep-seated hatred, fueled by economic hardship, political disillusionment, and a relentless smear campaign. She was trapped in a narrative not of her own making, stripped of her humanity, and reduced to a caricature of aristocratic excess. The storming of the Bastille on July 14, 1789, marked the official beginning of the French Revolution. This act of defiance shattered the illusion of the monarchy's impregnable power and plunged France into a period of unprecedented social and political upheaval. The royal family, initially hesitant to leave Versailles, became increasingly isolated and vulnerable. On October 5, 1789, a furious mob, primarily women from the Parisian markets, marched on Versailles, demanding bread and the royal family's return to Paris. The following day, under duress, the king-queen and their children were forced to leave Versailles, their cherished home, and take up residence at the Tuileries Palace in Paris, essentially becoming prisoners of the revolution. Life at the Tuileries was a constant ordeal. The family was under continuous surveillance, their movements restricted, and their every action scrutinized. The initial revolutionary fervor, though aimed at reform, quickly escalated into radicalism. Attempts to escape, most notably the ill-fated flight to Varennes in June 1791, further solidified public distrust and fueled accusations of treason. The royal family's desperate attempt to flee to the loyalist stronghold of Montmaid was thwarted, and they were brought back to Paris in humiliation. This event was a fatal blow to any remaining popular support for the monarchy. It exposed their perceived complicity with foreign powers and their desire to undermine the revolution. The monarchy was formally abolished in September 1792, and the First French Republic was proclaimed. Louis XVI, stripped of his title, became Citizen Louis Capet. The royal family was then moved to the Temple Tower, a medieval fortress which served as their prison. Here, their living conditions deteriorated significantly. They were subjected to constant indignity and deprivation. Marie Antoinette, once the epitome of elegance and luxury, now faced the grim reality of prison life, enduring squalor, lack of privacy, and the constant threat of violence. The trial of Louis XVI began in December 1792. He was accused of treason and conspiracy against the state. Despite a spirited defense, he was found guilty and sentenced to death. On January 21, 1793, Louis XVI was guillotined, a chilling spectacle that sent shockwaves across Europe and marked a definitive break with the past. Marie Antoinette's fate was sealed. The Reign of Terror had begun, a period of extreme violence and purges orchestrated by Maximilien Robespierre and the Committee of Public Safety, aimed at eliminating all perceived enemies of the revolution. Marie Antoinette, a symbol of the old regime and a convenient scapegoat, was an obvious target. Her trial before the Revolutionary Tribunal began on October 14, 1793. The charges against her were numerous and fabricated treason, depleting the national treasury, conspiring with foreign powers, and even incest with her son, a particularly vile and baseless accusation designed to utterly dehumanize her. Throughout the trial, Marie Antoinette maintained her composure and dignity, denying the charges with quiet strength. Despite the lack of credible evidence and the clear political motivation behind the proceedings, the outcome was predetermined. The revolutionary fervor demanded her death. She was denied legal representation and the right to call witnesses. The trial was a sham, a theatrical exercise designed to legitimize her execution in the eyes of the public. On October 16, 1793, at the age of 37, Marie Antoinette was condemned to death. The sentence was delivered swiftly and there was no appeal. On the morning of her execution, she was stripped of her elegant clothes and dressed in a simple white shift. Her hands were tied behind her back, and her hair was roughly cut short. Unlike her husband, who had been transported to the scaffold in a closed carriage, Marie Antoinette was paraded through the streets of Paris in an open cart, subjected to the jeers and insults of the crowd. Her stoicism in the face of such humiliation was remarkable. The procession to the Place de la Révolution, now Place de la Concorde, was slow and agonizing. She passed the Tuileries Palace, her former residence, a poignant reminder of her lost life of privilege. As she ascended the steps of the guillotine, her foot accidentally stepped on the executioner's foot. Her last recorded words, uttered with characteristic grace and politeness, were, "Pardon me, sir, I did not do it on purpose." Moments later, the blade fell, ending the life of the last Queen of France. Her body was unceremoniously thrown into an unmarked grave in the Madeleine Cemetery, later moved to the Basilica of Saint Denis, the traditional burial place of French monarchs. After the Bourbon Restoration, the execution of Marie Antoinette marked a symbolic end to the ancient regime and the complete triumph of the radical phase of the French Revolution. Her death, alongside that of her husband and countless other aristocrats and perceived enemies, fueled the Reign of Terror, which continued to consume France until Robespierre himself was overthrown and executed in July 1794. In the immediate aftermath of her death, Marie Antoinette remained a reviled figure, a symbol of royal excess and a convenient target for revolutionary propaganda. However, as the fervor of the revolution subsided and the political landscape shifted, her image began to undergo a transformation. During the Bourbon Restoration, she was rehabilitated as a martyr, a tragic queen who suffered unjustly at the hands of bloodthirsty revolutionaries. Her story was reinterpreted to emphasize her suffering, her dignity in the face of adversity, and her unwavering devotion to her family and faith. In the centuries that followed, Marie Antoinette has remained a captivating and controversial figure. Historians have debated her role in the downfall of the monarchy, her personal responsibility for the economic crisis, and the extent to which she was a victim of circumstances beyond her control. While her early life was undoubtedly marked by excessive privilege and a certain naivete regarding the struggles of the common people, it is impossible to ignore the immense pressure she faced from a young age. Thrust into a foreign court, burdened by expectations she could not immediately fulfill, and relentlessly targeted by a hostile press, she became a powerful symbol onto which a nation's discontent could be projected. Ultimately, Marie Antoinette's life is a poignant reminder of the fragility of power and the destructive force of public opinion. She was a woman born into a gilded cage, destined for a role she was ill prepared to undertake. Her attempts to navigate the treacherous waters of court life, her personal struggles, and her transformation from a frivolous young queen to a dignified prisoner paint a picture of a woman who, despite her initial flaws, was undeniably oppressed by the weight of her crown and the unforgiving gaze of a nation in turmoil. Her story serves as a powerful cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power, the seductive allure of scapegoating, and the tragic consequences when the ideals of revolution consume the very individuals they once sought to liberate. Her legacy, far from being simply that of a frivolous queen, is a complex tapestry woven with threads of privilege, political machination, public perception, and the ultimate, brutal truth of a life consumed by the very system she represented.